This is Minecraft, a blog game created in 2011 by Mojang, which I'm suing for breaking the law and pissing me off. But to understand why I'm doing this, we need to go back to December of 2022. You see, Minecraft is a game where anyone can add anything, even if it wasn't part of the original game. And what I wanted to do was recreate an old game I used to play in 2013 called MC War that unfortunately shut down. And after months of development and growing the community that was eager to play the game on launch, we finally set the release date to the 2nd of June of 2023. And this is where everything went wrong. Because only one day after posting the release date, a tweet was posted stating that Mojang Enforcement, basically the guys that enforce the terms of service, threatened to take down a server called GTM because a new directive from Mojang leadership had determined that guns and weapons are considered non-compliant features under the adult content requirement for commercial usage servers, and that they now have to be completely removed because they're against the brand guidelines, usage guidelines, and end-user license agreement. So basically, after months of development and thousands of dollars spent on marketing, yes, this thing costs $1,000, everything was completely wasted because it's now prohibited. So as you can imagine, all servers that contained guns basically entered panic mode because we were all about to be annihilated by Mojang. A group with all of these owners was created to discuss and potentially negotiate, asking very valid questions such as, how come servers that have had firearms for well over a decade so far have never had any issues but are suddenly prohibited? Why is it okay for Mojang's own marketplace, where they get a cut of every sale, to have guns when we don't get to have them? And what exactly do they mean by guns and weapons and suitable for children? Because it's totally not like there are thousands of games that literally have guns and weapons in them that are made for children. And it's totally not like Minecraft itself has explosive crossbows, which are a firearm in most jurisdictions, by the way, gunpowder, bombs, axes, swords, poison, insulation, slavery, you get the idea. To which Mojang, after conveniently ignoring half these points, replied that this recent directive from Mojang leadership wasn't for guns and weapons, but was purely for guns and firearms. Isn't that change convenient? But hey, what would I know? It's not like Mojang hides information from the public for illicit reasons, right? This is called foreshadowing. So since Mojang didn't exactly explain what qualified as a real-life weapon, we went ahead and asked, is this a weapon? What about this? Which they, again, completely ignored. And after demanding more answers, they eventually said on June 13th that the key decision makers are on holiday. So I guess we'll just have to wait until these key decision makers stop being on vacation. But hey, it's not like it's gonna take months. 6 months is how long it took them to reply. And the thing about having your entire project's existence be based off of the decision of a CEO that is on vacation is that you can't really justify investing into development or marketing when it could all go to shit if they don't change their minds. We were essentially told that even though the decision is not final, guns are okay for now, which is a different way of saying, but we will be changing our minds later. We just can't afford any more bad press right now because this entire thing has hit the news and got millions of people to be mad at us for being assholes. And while that could have been the end of it, while these assholes spent half a year replying, I was investigating whether this entire fiasco could have been illegal. And oh boy, this entire fiasco started because a new directive reinterpreted adult content in the end user license agreement, in other words EULA, to include guns and firearms and hence prohibit them. These clauses that are written in the EULA are more commonly known as a terms of service. This is what's called a click wrap agreement. It's the thing that forces you to check it before signing up for a service. It's essentially a set of rules that you have to follow when using the service, but the thing you have to understand is that this is a type of legally binding agreement or otherwise contract. And unlike some third world countries like the United States, where companies can get away with writing anything into the contract like, you can't sue us because we said so, Mojang is in Sweden, and Sweden is in Europe. And in Europe, we are supposed to have competent governments that have things like consumer protection laws and contract law. Note how I said supposed to. This is important for later. In Mojang's first email, they say that under the new directive, guns and firearms are not compliant. They follow it up saying that these activities are specifically prohibited by the Mojang brand guidelines that literally do not exist, but which they cite multiple times anyways, the commercial guidelines, and the EULA. Now, let's go ahead and look at the actual contract for these specific prohibitions. And oh, would you look at that? It hasn't been updated at all since April of 2020, which is over 3 years ago. And these specific prohibitions that they mentioned are nowhere to be found. It's almost as if they pulled it out of their ass. Remember how I mentioned that it's not like Mojang hides information from the public for illicit reasons, right? Well, it turns out that this new directive that prohibits guns, which Mojang enforces as if it was part of the EULA, isn't actually on the EULA. So this information is hidden, only known to Mojang, and not written anywhere. And since it can't be found anywhere and is literally pulled out of their ass, they can change it as many times as they want. Which they have. 3 times. Now, you might be asking what the problem is, since at the end they did tell us what we need to do to comply. And you see, Sweden and Europe, which Sweden is a part of, have these things called consumer protection laws and contract law that dictate how a contract is allowed to be written. And by looking just a little bit in Europe's website, you can see that contracts must be fair, transparent, and cannot have unfair terms. Like, for example, a get-out clause such as all permissions and consents may be revoked at any time if we think that it is appropriate to do so, or we don't like what you are doing. If that doesn't sound like a get-out clause, hidden terms, one-sided changes to a contract, one-sided changes to a product or service, one-sided interpretation of the contract. Doesn't that sound familiar? And after contacting the European Union's legal advisors, I was told that misleading omissions, basically hiding information, is a form of unfair commercial practice where Mojang fails to give information to the consumer, and that all relevant information needs to be present, and that it's also misleading omission if Mojang provides the consumer with information but does so in an unclear, unintelligible, or ambiguous, loosely worded way. It's almost as if they're not allowed to have hidden clauses, where I am then encouraged to sue before the home court, because all the time and resources I put into my project have essentially gone to shit. So now that we've covered that Mojang hiding shit from the public in a contract is illegal under European consumer protection laws, on top of things like the contra proferentum doctrine, which basically says that if something is loosely worded, I'm the one that gets to choose how to interpret it. But Kian, why go through all this trouble? This is probably just a mistake by Mojang, a one-off thing. It's not like Mojang does a ton more illegal shit, right? Now, when all of this started, I never wanted this to be a lawsuit. I simply expected Mojang to not be assholes and be reasonable. And the way I tried to do this was by collecting all of this information and sending it to media outlets and news sources, knowing that it would create a ton of backlash that Mojang simply couldn't ignore.
Mojang is set to release,
according to their new guidelines,
Mojang no longer being the kind company.
It didn't work. Even though the information got millions of views, Mojang just played the good old do nothing and the problem will just go away. But now I am here, you pieces of shit. But then, while we were waiting 6 months for the key figures to stop being on vacation, on the 2nd of August 2023, Mojang did the worst thing they've ever done. They updated the EULA that had been unchanged since 2020 and tried to hide the fact that they had changed it by not telling anyone about it and releasing it at the same time as a major game update.
Snapshot content, really cool. EULA changes, very important. Which one gets announced on Twitter? The snapshot. Is one being used to mask the other?
Putting all of their efforts into marketing the game update so people wouldn't notice the EULA update. They never notified anybody about it. Now, under consumer protection laws, when a company changes its terms of service, it is required to notify its users about said changes before they take effect. Which is the reason you get all of these annoying emails that say, hey, we've changed our terms of service. Mojang tried covering it up. But not only did Mojang not notify anybody of these changes on top of covering it up, but they also added that
these guidelines may change as time goes by. We reserve the right to change our minds at any time. So don't count on these guidelines always being here. It is up to you to check back to see if these guidelines have changed.
And you bet I wasn't gonna let them get away with hiding that. After analyzing the contract and putting all the shitty parts together, I sent the information forward to basically everyone. And oh boy.
Mojang updated its EULA.
Minecraft has gone full
Minecraft EULA has
1984.
mis à jour les EULA.
We have been ignored
breaking
at
laws
every
in
single
various
time
Released on the same
to
day.
enforce it however they want.
Now, to say that this blew up in their face would be a little bit of an understatement. It got so bad that
A handful of creators were reached out to by Mojang and given a heads up. Attached were answers and guidance to clear up the confusion.
That's right. Select figures were grouped up by Mojang and given information that wasn't publicly available to try and calm it down a bit. Information that should be present in the contract by law. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, they forced every single one of these members to sign a non-disclosure agreement that forbids them from giving out any information that they were told for a contract that should be publicly available. I bet they didn't think I'd find out, but I know lots of things. So now that we've covered that they hide changes from the contract, force select people to sign non-disclosure agreements for changes that should be publicly available on the contract, refuse to notify about these changes and try to cover it up, it can't possibly get any worse, right? In the end-user license agreement, they specifically state twice that any form of gambling, violence, terrorism, or other unsafe and mature content is strictly forbidden. Which totally makes sense, but what if I told you that the gambling part was a lie? You see, in Minecraft, when you look at any of the biggest servers, you'll quickly notice a recurring pattern in their shops. They have something called crates and crate keys. These keys are used to play lotteries inside of the game that have a chance to give you extremely overpowered items or more money than anyone else. Almost like a casino with extremely similar tactics that are made to get you addicted and turn a profit. Theoretically speaking, under Mojang's own rules, this should be completely forbidden shown as it's clearly gambling even by Sweden's own definitions of gambling. But it turns out that there's a separate list of hidden terms, just like in the gun case, that allows gambling to take place, which has led to thousands of children getting gambling addictions. I spoke to them.
I was around 8 years old when I first started gambling on Minecraft servers at 14. I wanted the overpowered armor. It was about feeling cool and getting strong. It gave me a chance to win an item that you just couldn't get. When I'd win, everybody gave me attention. It was like this rush took over every time I opened a crate. I felt on top of the world winning those. The thrill faded fast and I just wanted it to happen again. Hold on me like a habit I just couldn't break. They always left me wanting more. It just went downhill from there. I got my dad's credit card and spent it on pocket money I'd had, hoping I stole my mom's credit card to buy a crate. I lost everything. Thinking back, I hated it. Left me feeling sad and couldn't break the cycle. Plunged me into a deep depression.
It's terrible. And they do this as a Swedish company, where our own government and gambling institutions have some of the strictest laws in the world related to gambling that completely bar anyone below 18 years old from playing, even going as far as to requiring bank ID authentication to play a scratch-off ticket. And Mojang just allows it. So now that I've shown you some of the illegal shit that Mojang has done, and trust me, there's so much more, like how they're currently forcing developers onto their own marketplace so they can charge extremely exorbitant fees for no reason while blocking off any kind of competition. As if that doesn't sound like some company that has recently been hit by billions in fines from Europe. It's time to move on to the lawsuit. Since Mojang has shown that they really don't give a shit about the law, a lawsuit is really the only way to get them to realize that your actions have consequences. How do you actually sue a billion-dollar corporation owned by an even bigger trillion-dollar corporation? It's quite easy actually. All you need to do is hire a lawyers are extremely expensive. So when you're legally broke to the point of having to live in an underground basement filled with radioactive gas, that's unfortunately not a joke, how are you supposed to finance justice? Remember when I said, here in Europe, we are supposed to have competent government? This is where that becomes important. When someone in the European Union has rights guaranteed by the Charter of Human Rights, like for example Article 38, consumer protection, if that person does not have enough money to seek out justice, according to Article 47, you should have the right to an effective remedy before a tribunal and a fair and public hearing where everyone shall have the possibility of being advised, defended, and represented. In other words, even if you're broke, according to the Charter of Human Rights, you are entitled to seek out justice. Every country in Europe needs to comply with this charter to be part of the European Union. And Sweden's way of doing this is through Rättshjälpsmyndigheten, the legal aid institution, which according to their own website provides remuneration of legal aid for up to 100 hours of work unless otherwise determined by the court. And after contacting hundreds of lawyers, I was told information that is hidden from the institution's website. The first one is that when a lawyer has to work with a client that has legal aid, they are forced to reduce their hourly rates to a rättshjälpstaxa, which is often less than 40% of what they usually charge an hour. This basically means that the overwhelming majority of lawyers I contacted simply refused to take the case, and that the ones that were willing to do so were extremely inexperienced. And that's not exactly a fair and effective remedy, is it? And the second biggest problem is that this case is so complex that it would way overshoot the 100 hours that were mentioned on the website. But wait a minute, doesn't it also say unless otherwise determined by a court? It turns out that after talking to employees that work at the legal aid institution, on top of them having a ton of spelling mistakes and writing like cavemen, like seriously, how do you write like this and are employed at the government? They admitted that the 100-hour limit is basically fixed and anything beyond that is just a few hours and it's just to end the case. Meaning that in other words, I have to either choose between getting 100 hours of help and then going bankrupt or represent myself alone in court against a billion-dollar corporation. Not exactly fair, is it? So at this point, the government institution that was supposed to uphold Article 47 had failed to do so. I then went to these two institutions that are supposed to oversee that other government institutions do their job properly. But unfortunately, they said, we don't care, it's not important enough. I wish I was joking, I really do. Next up, we have Sweden's Consumer Protection Agency, Konsumentverket, which is supposed to represent you if you are unable to do so yourself and the case is determined to be of importance enough to consumers. To which they replied that representation in this case cannot be expected to lead to an outcome that is of importance to law enforcement. In other words, they don't give a shit. Next up, we have the Swedish National Board of Consumer Complaints, ARN, that said that apparently when I entered this agreement with Mojang when I was 12 years old, I did not do so acting as a consumer, meaning that I must have been a really young 12-year-old corporate entity to enter this contract with Mojang at 12 years old. Yeah. Every single government institution in Sweden that was supposed to uphold justice has failed to do so. And Article 47 of the Charter of Human Rights has been violated by the entire country of Sweden. Mojang will keep getting away with this because they know full well that nobody that is affected by their decisions has the means to sue them in court. I'm sorry. I really tried.
This didn't end how I thought it would end. And while I really want to give up because like at this point I've tried everything, there's just nothing more that I can do, my friends convinced me to try one last thing.
because this isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us, all of you. If Mojang gets away with this, they're setting the precedent and they can do whatever they want and we have no rights whatsoever. So I'm opening a crowdfunding campaign for legal fees so that maybe, just maybe, we're able to hold Mojang accountable for everything they've done as a community, because if we don't fight, nobody will.